All right, my friends, I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to a very interesting and special this week in crypto compared to the average week here on 11/11/22. I hope you're all staying safe and warm and navigating these very choppy crypto markets safely right now, because it's a certainly very volatile time with everything that has happened over the past week. Obviously, the big headline being the fact that FTX has filed for bankruptcy. Sam has filed for Chapter 11. There's even rumors that he is or has already fled the country and was rumored to be arrested on the tarmac at the Bahamas airport. Unsure about the validity of those claims yet, but it's certainly an interesting development and a big fallout for someone who was a top 10 name in crypto in terms of his power in the space, with FTX being a top 5 exchange in terms of volume and how it was controlling the markets. We're really seeing evidence of how much it was keeping markets somewhat stable prior to its fallout. And now that the company, both the global side and now reported to be the US side of things, are imploding, it's causing markets to fall. Undoubtedly, there's a lot of evidence that this news has directly impacted prices negatively, and it's a shame, really, for most people who are bulls in the space who had 1 week ago been quite optimistic. We were talking about it being an altcoin party. If you look at last week's video prior to this news, and obviously when this broke, it was pretty unprecedented. So we'll be getting into exactly what's going on with FTX and FTT, the native token, kind of putting out a pretty similar pattern to what we saw with Luna about 6-7 months ago. Just a complete free fall with very, very few signs of any sort of rebound attempt. And, that's what you would expect from the native token from an exchange that has suddenly been reported to be bankrupt. So, yeah, it's shocking what's been going on, but it's not the only thing that's been happening. Obviously, the CPI data came out yesterday, and it was rather positive. It beat expectations by a lot, and gave hope that inflation is beginning to ease, and there is some some good chance of recovery for the overall economy, the equities markets out there, which normally are correlated pretty heavily to crypto, at least in 2022 here. But obviously, this news with FTX has caused a rare correlation break between the two, and equities markets are thriving while crypto is not thriving. Crypto is kind of shopping right now after obviously 2 to 3 days ago we saw huge bloodbaths going on, which is why you see the major red bars that we're looking at right here. But yeah, we can jump into some of the metrics and the data, and of course, for those of you who are watching on YouTube or even our Twitter stream, feel free to drop questions about some assets that you'd like us to look into. It's an especially difficult time to look into specific altcoins because everything, when there's a massive bloodbath like this, everything tends to be very bunched up and correlated to one another, regardless of the fundamentals that might be going on for any particular asset. Eventually, the waters will kind of steady, and there will be opportunities for altcoins to recover and kind of go on their own paths, like we were seeing 1 week ago. But the noise surrounding this FTX situation and Binance maybe or maybe not purchasing FTX, depending on whether they like the books and everything was to CZ's expectation when he signed that LOI with Sam. That's all yet to be seen, but while there's so much discussion about it, it's going to continue to send shockwaves through crypto. It doesn't mean things are going to fall further down, but it does mean that things are going to be very tightly spaced until there is more certainty as to how the air is going to clear here. So, as always, I want to remind everyone, we don't give investment advice on this channel. What we do is provide bullish and bearish divergence metrics, show exactly what's going on, both fundamentally and quantitatively, with the idea being that history tends to repeat itself. If we see these kinds of divergences now, and we look at 2 years ago or 2 months ago, and we saw something that was very similar, it generally means that there's a high probability of prices going up just like it did back then, or prices going down like it did back then. So keep that in mind, and we will jump right into our first topic, which is, of course, the prices falling off a cliff. Bitcoin fell 17% over the last 7 days. Ethereum fell 22%. This is obviously disappointing because 1 week ago we were talking about Ethereum at the high 1500s, low 1600s. It was beginning to really look like it was getting back to its pre-merge levels there and climbing. But for now, we've seen some major setbacks. There's talk about sub 1,000 Ethereum now with all of this madness going on. Bitcoin has hit a 2-year low itself, dropping to, I think, 15.5K. Give or take $100 here or there. That was the low, and this was the lowest we've seen since November of 2020, when prices were still recovering from Black Thursday, when COVID sent Bitcoin down into the 4 digits. So, yeah, this is a serious drop that is pretty unprecedented, and there have been many scandals and unfortunate events in crypto that have shocked, the traders in the markets out there. But this is maybe one of the biggest we've seen in a decade since the Mt. Gox hack. So one more time, I'll just reiterate: prices will be volatile and very choppy, and the uncertainty of how this is going to end up will continue to keep prices suppressed, not necessarily go down further, but at least suppressed until the smoke clears. So yeah, I mean, we look at Bitcoin and Ethereum down 17 and 22% respectively, but you look at some of the real losers here, with Solana giving up almost half of its market cap, It got down to $11 at one point a couple days ago. It's at 16 now, near 33%. Huobi token 32%. Aptos 33%. It'll be interesting to see, speaking of Huobi token, how some of the other native tokens of existing exchanges will react once the smoke clears. We saw an initial reaction from BNB where it jumped 20% in the matter of about an hour after the news broke that CZ was buying FTX. And then it quickly fell as people realized it was a little more uncertain and not as much of a given as CZ was making it out to be, because there were rumors he saw the books of FTX and said, oh, I don't think I can buy this. And obviously bankruptcy rumors are making it hard for people to envision Binance actually buying it anymore. So nevertheless, logically speaking, all of those FTX traders, assuming they're still interested in crypto, they have to go somewhere else. And other exchanges like Binance and Huobi may end up being beneficiaries as global exchanges. So keep that in mind. It may be too early to see any price reactions, but I anticipate there should be before the end of the year at least. You can see social volume surged all over the place. Bitcoin up 16%. That's a good thing. We'll talk a little bit about its social dominance here on the call. Solana, with its huge drop, had almost 2.5 times an uptick in social volume. These are the kind of things that really cause volatility and potentially cause price direction shifts. So keep in mind that social volume is a very important thing to focus on, especially when it's certain assets that are getting lots of discussion. You can see over here, Tron sticking out at 153%. This was due to Justin Sun stating that he is planning to redeem all of the lost Tron that was on FTX. So they got a nice positive boost in PR as a result of his announcement. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Any other things I can add on the screener? Probably not for now. Why don't we jump? Oh, one other thing, just while we're here, we can look at development activity just to see how altcoins are doing on the dev front and seeing how their GitHub is active right now. Yeah, so Cardano has actually had a huge uptick recently. Maybe we can look at it on today's call if we have time, but it's back in #1 after Polkadot and Kusama were dominating for the last month to 2 months or so here. Cosmos is up there in the top 5 now. Decentraland is up there in the top 5. That's new. Ethereum, Internet Computer, Status, Vega, Hedera round out the top 10 there. All right, so as far as some of our metrics go, let's take a look at how the overall discussions related to FTX and Sam Bankman-Friedman, who goes by SBF. Let's see how the frequency of the discussions related to these two topics have coincided with crypto's fall here. We can see on November 8th, the initial point in which there was a huge top and then a huge fallout. Yeah, that coincided perfectly with the FTX news that accounts were being frozen and there was something seriously wrong at the time of this announcement. So yes, anyone who thinks that it's just coincidental that prices have been falling, coinciding with this FTX and SBF news, it's pretty hard to believe it's a coincidence, knowing that the top hit right as the news broke, about an hour after, not even, like 15 to 30 minutes after. Then we see this huge plummet, a second wave as more news broke the next day. It finally actually hit a bottom here, which was interesting. So this was kind of a, sell the rumor, buy the news situation, where the rumor happened, price was plummeting, more bad news happened, and eventually it got so bad that the unanimous decision in crypto was that all of this was horrible and prices were going to keep plummeting. And once we see a unanimous consensus like that, often bottoms occur and all of those bearish sentiments get surprised when prices bounce instead. We can see here there was then some Sam Bankman-Fried news when he announced bankruptcy right here, personal bankruptcy for himself. This meant it was going to be pretty hard for FTX to have any sign of recovering a couple days ago when there were people still holding out hope. Prices went back down. Things started to get quiet again. Rumors started picking up again here on the 10th. And it's been kind of a chop fest ever since, up until just a couple hours ago. I guess the rumor about Sam being arrested in the Bahamas, which is unconfirmed right now, I should say, that obviously sent prices going down once again, and that's where we sit now after a huge flush down. And you know, there's a few things going on here. It's not just all related to the news. It's related to how traders are reacting to it, not just by their sentiment on social platforms, but by their actual funding rates. And we can take a look at how traders have been longing versus shorting over the last 48 hours or so. This blue line here is Bitcoin. And you can see that when people were getting super duper long, we had a bounce, interestingly, which is atypical when there's a super long contract funding rate forming. But eventually, when people stayed long, it did mark a top and it went back to neutral. Meanwhile, you can see that altcoins have been really fluctuating between going short, going long, going short once again, and really staying short ever since yesterday. So a lot of people have been kind of neutral on Bitcoin for the last 24 hours, but shorting altcoins, mostly quite successfully, because altcoins have been hit pretty hard, even just in the last 24 hours. If we look at things, it's kind of a mixed bag, but more red than green. So if we start to see altcoin funding rates really get down here to like 0.01 once again, that would be a signal that people are getting way too fearful, and prices in most scenarios will start to pop and rebound as a result of people trying to anticipate prices going further down, because prices tend to always go the path of forcing liquidations when people get too greedy or too fearful. So heading back to our social trends here, we can also see what the greed versus the fear looks like right now, with the blue bars here indicating people who are mentioning words like buy or buying or bought or bottom or long, for example. And then the red bars are sell or selling or sold or top or short, basically bearish types of words. And you can see over time that when there is a huge separation and major uptick in optimistic words, bullish words, that tends to be when tops occur. When there's kind of I'm trying to find a good example, like up here, when the gap is starting to close and there's a little bit of negativity, that is what tends to lead to prices rising shortly after. We can see that the most recent example, even though, yes, there was a long spike, this was the largest bearish spike in terms of sentiment of the past month, and it ended up causing a bottom to occur until we started to see a wider gap and people were more bullish than they were bearish, and that caused the top. So you can see right there, there's really kind of a war going on between the bullish and the bearish sentiment right now, with overall people being more bearish than usual, understandably, with all of this going on and prices dropping as much as they have. But eventually that's going to settle down and we're really going to see where people stand. And if you combine their social sentiment with how they're putting their money where their mouth is, that's going to be a pretty good quantitative look at where prices are going to be heading next. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, there's been a major correlation break here, because equities yesterday, someone in chat can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe yesterday was the best performing day of 2022 for stocks. I saw NASDAQ was up over 7%, the US tech index, and that's significant. That really has been a surprise to a lot of people, and it came after CPI data came out and basically told everyone that inflation was not quite as bad as we thought in this latest jobs update. And that caused prices to really surge because a lot of people, likely correctly, are identifying that when with prices going down so much, it's due to this fear of recession and obviously the FOMC causing interest rate hikes right now. And with this positive news saying, hey, this inflation stuff might be kind of coming to an end, and the FOMC may be done hiking interest rates by 75 BPS every time. That caused a lot of optimism, and we saw the dollar drop a little bit, and the S&P and NASDAQ and gold all rise pretty well. Gold is at about a almost 3-month high. The S&P is at about a 2-month high, but Bitcoin is at a 2-year low. So yeah, that's a big change after we saw so much correlation throughout the year. And it doesn't mean the correlation is completely over, because this could be a temporary setback. But if the correlation isn't over, that would actually imply that Bitcoin and crypto has some making up to do. And after the smoke clears regarding this news, it could very well click back into where the S&P and gold are looking right now, which is up a lot. So it's something to watch. And that is a bullish case right now, that when fundamental news of this FTX fallout begins to dissipate, we could see some ground being made up by crypto. Certainly not guaranteed by any means, but something to think about. Now, in terms of, well, actually, we'll look at FTT first, because obviously this is the big token in the news, and it's not even in, I think this market cap rank is delayed. I don't even believe the market cap is in the top 100 anymore, but it was in the top 50 or so. So it's already dropped off a cliff even since this was updated yesterday. Obviously, we know when the big volume spike hit. This was when the news broke on November 8th, and people were desperately trying to get their funds off. Some people were able to pull it off. We talked to Equities Tracker just yesterday, and he talked about how many people were trying different contracts, trying to basically trade their existing assets on FTX into a contract that did still have withdrawal availability. And a lot of people misunderstood. It wasn't just FTX closing all withdrawals. They literally didn't have the liquidity to allow withdrawals except for certain tokens. So the people that were savvy were basically trying different token withdrawal contracts until they found one that FTX still had liquidity on, and then were able to safely get their money out using that token. But eventually those options dried up, and now I believe it's just impossible to get money off of, and everything is kind of shutting down. So now people are kind of waiting to see if CZ will bail them out and purchase the I presume millions or billions of dollars of debt that FTX now has. So that was the big volume spike. Makes sense there.
I believe that's already off the table, Brian. I believe
did he confirm?
Already said they won't do it.
Great to know. Thank you for saying so. So if we go to CZ Binance, there should be a post about it, I presume. Do you know when he announced it, Balresh?
It was yesterday, I think.
Let's check it out. I know he put out this message. I won't read the whole thing, but I know that he gave kind of a transparent update about the deal. He said, obviously, do not comment on the deal publicly or internally. If you're involved, don't ask. We have a good team handling it. So this was yesterday, I guess, like a day and a half ago. He updated that we're waiting for proof of reserves to finish. Just let me know if you see it. Yeah, I don't want to just scroll through things to find it, but I'm sure it's somewhere. Because I heard rumors that he was pulling out. I just didn't know if it was confirmed. But in the meantime, we can continue looking at some of the fundamentals here. Obviously, daily active addresses spiked. We saw MVRV basically go off of our axis here. Yeah, so average traders, weird sits now, average traders are down 79% on a 30-day basis. That's the lowest it's ever been. This is obviously a bit beyond just a normal fluctuation because of the fundamental reasoning. And we wouldn't expect that it would be any sort of buy opportunity here with just because MVRV is low, which is normally a buy signal. Whale transaction count, check this out. Over the course of, let's look at it on a daily perspective. So over the course of just November 8th, we saw 472 transactions that exceeded $100,000. That's suspicious to me. It really, especially here too, like even going back to the 5th, 161 $100,000 transactions all of a sudden, then 239 on the 7th, and then the big D-Day on the 8th with 472. Yeah, there were definitely some insiders who were savvy to what was going on and getting their money out early, anticipating that this would be happening. And then, up until yesterday, we were still seeing a lot of heavy transactions as people were pulling their money out. These were probably more of the retail and even institutional traders. But I would fathom that a lot of these were insiders and people directly related to FTX and maybe even Sam himself pulling out a lot of money. So it was the same one where he announced that, as a result of corporate due diligence, as well as the latest news reports regarding mishandled customer funds and alleged U.S. agency investigations, we've decided we will not pursue the potential acquisition of FTX.com. 63.5 thousand likes, 18.4 thousand retweets. He goes on. In the beginning, our hope was to be able to support FTX's customers to provide liquidity, but the issues are beyond our control or ability to help. Every time a major player in the industry fails, retail consumers will suffer. We've seen over the last several years that the crypto ecosystem is becoming more resilient, and we believe in time that outliers that misuse user funds will be weeded out by the free market. It's a good statement. It should be this way. They're correct. As regulatory frameworks are developed and as the industry continues to evolve toward greater decentralization, the ecosystem will grow stronger. Yeah, so that's pretty official that the purchase is definitely off the table now. And to those of you who had funds on FTX that you weren't able to pull out, of course, our condolences go out to you. But at the end of the day, Binance had to do what they had to do to make sure they were making a good business choice. And after all the numbers started to expose themselves, it was pretty clear that there was no path toward buying. So it's disappointing to say the least, and that's a lot of funds that are basically being burned into oblivion. But we move on, and like I said, other exchanges should undoubtedly benefit from it, especially ones that have already been functioning on a global scale. So it's something to keep in mind, and to bring up a few further metrics that we've seen that were related to kind of some early suspicious activity before all the news broke. Take a look at this. So this blue and yellow chart here that I'm going to open, this is the 82 wallet. Most likely, this is speculation from research by our team. This was speculation of FTX's direct Ethereum profits and the wallet that they were kept in. And you can see here over time, big drop off at the beginning of 2022, started to rise again, plenty of normal fluctuations. And then this was right around the 6th and 7th, huge drop off. And basically their Ethereum wallet went to about just 576 Ethereum after being right at around 1 million close to a year ago. So that's interesting to see. And then the red and pink chart here, this is what we think to be the Ethereum and stablecoin withdrawal wallet on FTX. And this one's arguably a lot more suspicious because they had a huge withdrawal in mid-July. And then starting here, it started to look very suspicious in late September, early October, a big drop off, basically cutting their reserves in half, and then going to basically 23 Ethereum on the 7th. This was the day before all of the news went down. And it was all kind of rumors related to lack of solvency and stuff at this time. But yeah, if many of us had been savvy to this address dropping off a cliff the day before all the news came through, it would confirm that it was probably a lot more than a rumor, right? So that's very interesting stuff indeed. Check this out as well. This was related to BNB and how it just had an enormous spike, despite social dominance not really jumping on at all. And then right before it, we interestingly saw a huge funding rate plummet in BNB. So a lot of people were expecting prices to go down, and instead we saw a huge surge in price. And that's something we see often. If there's an anomaly on one particular asset that's seeing, man, it's like off the axis right now, so I can't even show. But normally, when assets are kind of bunched together and there's maybe a slight short bias, but one asset has a massive short, that asset is most likely to see a surge, assuming it's not related to, bankruptcy or something like that, right? So that was very interesting to see as well. And then there was another story right around here. Yeah, if Maxim was here, he could explain this better than me. But in short, there were just tons and tons of addresses being linked to ones that were on FTX through 2 different wallets, and they were all being funneled in here. And he says this chart alone tells the story of FTX not holding the assets of their users in the cold wallets. Looks like they played with the users' money, or they played with the market reaction to seeing such funds flow. The outcome of such a game is unclear. And this was really before it was definitive that they were messing with users' funds at the level that they were. And Maxim kind of saw it through the metrics before it was confirmed. And Binance really put the nail in the coffin by identifying this. But it's very interesting to see just how all of these addresses were linked to 2 major FTX exchange accounts. Another point I wanted to make was just prior to all this news breaking, stablecoin accumulation was going pretty nuts. We saw USD coin in particular among whales being accumulated, and we consider sharks and whales kind of in that $100,000 to $10 million range. Anything above 10 million, you're likely looking at exchanges that aren't very active and reactive to the market fluctuations. But yeah, this is still kind of happening. We're not seeing a huge drop off in whale stablecoin holdings by any means. Tether a little bit, and I'll show that in a moment. But USD coin, we were seeing a big surge. Tether, we were seeing some nice growth after a massive drop off. And that often correlates with prices going up. And you could see at the time, just right before November 7th, Bitcoin was having a great time at 20.5K. And at least starting to look like it was getting its legs back. So why don't we look at that now and see exactly what the update looks like. We'll go down here. Okay, So if we look at just the 100 to 10,000 Bitcoin, you can see an interesting uptick here. I'll get to that in just a sec. And I want to add, what I'll do is I'll lock this so I can keep it on the screen. And I want to add USDT 100,000 to $10 million. Oh, I see. Did Tether just update their logo? It looks different now. Okay. So this is, lock this too, because I want to add USDC as well. This is the Tether and the Bitcoin fluctuations. And you can see something very interesting going on amongst the whales. I'm going to even zoom it out to the last year. So Bitcoin just actually had its largest week or so of accumulation in quite a while. I think the last time we saw something like this was in February, and we'll probably have more updates on these as the story unfolds today. But yeah, they were holding a total of 15.6K. There were a total of 15.6K addresses, and now it's up to 15.78K. So this was an increase just over the past 5 days of about 0.6% more addresses. In the meantime, Tether dropped 3.5% in terms of the amount of addresses holding 100,000 to $10 million. So now we can look at it on a percentage held scale, and we'll do Tether here. Confirm that. We will lock it. Let's add Bitcoin. Actually, we'll do USDC first. $100,000 to 10 million. Merge those together. Yeah, so the accumulation for USDC hasn't stopped yet. They've actually gone all the way up to holding almost 40% of the supply, which is something that hasn't happened for a very long time. The last time we saw 40% held was September of 2020 by these USDC whales. So Tether's a little bit volatile right now, and it's undoubtedly due to some of the FTX stuff going on. It could have even been losses from whales who had their money in FTX. But regardless, USDC has really taken off, showing that there's an improvement in buying power from whales right now, which is something to keep a very close eye on. And just for kicks, let me add Bitcoin supply held to that chart as well. $100 to 10,000. And you can really see the fluctuation here with it topping up in late October and then plummeting. So look, even though there have been more and more large Bitcoin wallets showing up, the supply held by Bitcoin whales is sitting at under 45%, which we haven't really seen, I think, since 2018. Yeah, November 2018. So we're talking about a 4-year low in terms of the supply held by Bitcoin. That's still a major concern, guys, and we need to see that improve. And this minor uptick here isn't enough for us to really get too excited about. But we did see that uptick in the amount of addresses starting to explode. So that could be a good foreshadow for the supply beginning to improve. We're just going to have to see. But in terms of overall buying power, I like to see this. This is a very good sign, seeing this huge uptick since late October, where USDC whales hold 3.8% more than they did just 2 weeks ago in terms of the total supply of USDC. And it's about a 10.7% addition overall, bringing them up to a 2-year high there. So more good news than bad on the whale side, despite all of this stuff going on. And it indicates that when all of the smoke clears, there could be an advantage to staying strong through all of this madness. Okay, so let's look at some other Bitcoin metrics here really quick. And I did want to touch on the chat really quick just to see if there are any special questions going on. Yeah, I did see that SBF Twitter thread. It was super long. It was like 20 plus messages apologizing, but also kind of, to be honest, I felt it was kind of pushing the blame onto some of the other people in his circle and saying that, you know, he's only guilty because he's the CEO and he should be responsible for this kind of stuff. And I found that a bit odd. It didn't feel like a true apology. And if the rumor is true about him trying to flee the country and being caught somewhere in the Bahamas, yeah, that would probably confirm that he wasn't quite taking the accountability that people were hoping for. So that was very interesting. Noted about looking at Cardano. I'll try to do that because we skipped it last week. Do you think by number of addresses or balance of addresses is a better metric to look for for supply distribution? Good question. I like to put a little bit of an advantage on the supply held because you can see a huge number of addresses pop up or fall off at any given time. Yeah, YP's right. It could be both for sure. But if I had to pick just one to look at, I'd say the percentage held is better because at the end of the day, it's really about how much overall coins are being held cumulatively by all of those addresses, regardless of how many are popping up at any given time. Because sometimes it can just be, a massive whale breaking into 20 smaller whale addresses, and they still hold the same amount of coins cumulatively. So that doesn't really change anything, but it looks like it could change something on the number of address side of things, and that could be deceptive. So yeah, I'd say the percentage held is a bit more valuable and holds a little more weight. Okay, so let's look at some of the main Bitcoin metrics right now, because obviously it's still going to be the trigger point for crypto to either recover or plummet down further. And we can see here, undoubtedly, volume has exploded. That makes sense. Over 100 billion Bitcoin were being moved on the 8th and on the 9th, and then eventually fell back to 83 billion yesterday. And we're having another big day today. So it's something to watch closely. Until we see the volume die down, just expect ultimate volatility. And it's not really going to stop until we start seeing, sub 50 billion Bitcoin. In terms of daily active addresses, obviously we saw, I think this was definitely a 6-month high. Yeah, the last time we saw daily active addresses this high was in June, and that was right after the plummet from the latest FOMC interest rate hike. But yeah, daily active addresses and circulation are extremely high at the moment, and it'll stay that way, just like volume, until smoke clears. If we look at the NVT chart, which shows the divergence between the circulation right now and Bitcoin's overall market cap, this surge has actually given a neutral signal right now. It's just tough to call this an organic rise in circulation because it's a result of people reacting to all of the FTX and fundamental news happening right now. So it's kind of a wait and see. I'd still put more credence into what's been going on the last 3 months, which were showing a bearish divergence, indicating that prices could and probably will continue to fall down, which is exactly what's been happening. And on the Ethereum side, while we're on this NVT model, it's been a little more interesting here, going from super bearish to super bullish to super bearish to super bullish over these past 5-6 months or so. But watch right now, because there is some interesting stuff going on with Ethereum. Really quickly, because I don't know if we'll do a full synopsis of Ethereum. I'm going to show you guys what's been happening with the whales. Let me take off this, and I'm going to show you the 100 all the way up to 1 million coin Ethereum addresses. And we saw this going on. We're looking at the 1 year mark, but this was actually the biggest uptick in accumulation from Ethereum sharks and whales, which we deem 100 to 1 million coins. Biggest uptick since early September. So we're talking about a 10-week high in terms of accumulation. And you may have noticed that Ethereum, at least over the past 24 hours, has kind of led over Bitcoin by a pretty substantial margin. This could very well be why. And the fact that its circulation is super high at the moment as well, check out this spike, that could have a lot to do with it. Just like we saw 2 months ago, we're seeing another uptick right now. So yes, in terms of Ethereum versus Bitcoin, Ethereum does look like it's having a bit of an advantage, both in fundamentally seeing a little more circulation, as well as whales being a little more speculatively optimistic about it right now. All right, going back to Bitcoin. So MVRV, the 30-day MVRV is relatively low, but not massively, where this is like an ultra buy opportunity or something definitive. But generally speaking, anything below the 15% mark, right around there, that's going to be a good buy signal. And we saw that the 30-day MVRV did drop below it right at the bottom before jumping up. So that signal ended up being a very good one. You can see right here too, this marked a bottom and this marked a bottom. So anytime the red goes below that 15% mark, pretty nice sign. And then the long-term MVRV is still very, very low, negative 43% for the average year-long trader. That's still a good argument for people who are hodling and standing pat on all of this volatility right now. All right, funding rate is a big one. We already kind of touched on it. Let me try to refresh, and it may take a couple of minutes here. Actually, I don't even need, I'll just do it on Sandbase, make it easier. So let's go to just the past week. And we got to adjust the axis right now. Let's go to 15, still off the axis. Let's go to 30. Okay, we'll leave it there. So just looking at the 1 hour funding rate in yellow here for a moment, you can see that it was super long, and that was actually a result of FTX having a massive funding rate back when people were basically hopelessly uber longing their holdings, knowing there was a good chance they would not be getting it back anyways. So generally, when people get hopeless, they tend to enhance their risk and just almost go on tilt, for any of you who play poker or anything, where they basically just say, screw it, I'm going to go ultra long and see what happens. And eventually, we saw those turn into shorts. And I think this has less to do with FTX and more just DYDX and other exchanges with normal volume right now. But if we look at the 8 hour funding rate, let's bump this up a lot. So this is reflective of like Binance and Bitfinex right now. And you can see that they're super short as well on Bitcoin. And when that's the case, there's a better chance of a rise, especially with, all of these exchanges being in the short range right now. When we see things super long, prices tend to drop. When it's super short, prices tend to rise because liquidations happen. So in terms of you swing traders out there looking for a signal, this is a pretty good one that there's a stronger chance of a rise right now than a drop. You just have to be patient, knowing that on this red one, it only updates every 8 hours. The yellow one, that's FTX and DYDX, this updates every 1 hour. So if you're trying to get a good scope of all of the exchanges at once, you want to wait every 8 hours. And I think the next update actually comes in the next 1 to 2 hours here. But for now, it's very short. And that's a good sign that this plummet may be coming to a halt for now. As far as whale transactions, obviously they are sky high. It's pretty tough to imagine that this is more of an organic spike and not just related to FTX though. So take that with a grain of salt. We touched on whales already, with stable coins being the big story, because USDC is really showing a ton of increased buying power for whales right now, despite Bitcoin continuing to be dropped a lot by whales. On-chain transaction volume and profit to loss, the ratio shows some major losses, as you would expect during this plummet. Not really too much alpha we can say because of the fact that it happened due to an exchange imploding. In terms of mean dollar invested age, still not a lot of dormant coins being moved. We're still waiting for that kind of tapering off that indicates that there's starting to be some serious dormant token movement. That usually is a big signal that a bull market is starting, but for now, it doesn't look like we're anywhere near that. Network realized profit loss, check out all of these major losses here. Generally a good sign. You can see in most cases when there's a big plummet and it's followed by a huge drop in network realized profit loss, it at least stops the bleeding for a while. And we saw that in mid-May, we saw it in mid-June, and this one is a relatively low one as well that just happened on the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So now we're going to see if there's a market reaction to it. This kind of supports what we said with funding rate. It probably will at least signal that the bleeding is going to stop for a little while and maybe even make prices reverse and go up for a bit. But be careful. You don't want, this is much more of a long signal than a short signal. Supply and exchanges is very interesting. I would assume that this is related to FTX. I don't think we can't really look at specific exchanges for Bitcoin, but I think that part of this plummet was due directly to coins being moved away from FTX, especially prior to the news on the 7th and 8th. But as of now, Bitcoin supply and exchanges, regardless of reasoning, is below 8%. And it's been a long time since that's happened. Really since November 18 was the last time we saw it below 8%. And that's a good sign for the long run. It means that the amount of Bitcoin that could be sold off and cause future massive plummets in price is being diminished because there's simply less Bitcoin on the exchanges to be sold off. That's something to keep in mind, and it is a bullish argument right now. And in terms of the exchange flow balance, I mean, we're looking at super long term right now, but you can see the major drop-offs here and all of the negatives indicating there's a much higher outflow than there is inflow in terms of Bitcoin moving on and off exchanges. Zoom back in a little bit to the last 6 months. So social dominance, as promised, let's jump into it and see what's going on here. We'll zoom in. Yeah, let's just do the last month. Why not? So 20% is key right here. We want to go right about there. And in general, when Bitcoin is not being discussed at 20% or above, at least here in the year 2022, that's a sign that altcoins are still being focused on a little too much, or people are talking about Ethereum, Dogecoin, Shiba, a lot of the stuff that had been getting a lot of attention over the past month. that takes away from the discussions related to Bitcoin. And generally speaking, we want Bitcoin to be talked about at least 20% according to our metrics, because those usually indicate a rise can come, and there isn't too much euphoria over projects that contribute to the overall growth of the crypto sector. So, if we zoom out to the last year, it shows a bit of a better perspective. Put this back at 20% right there. So you can see the few times in 2022 where Bitcoin's social dominance has been above 20%, prices rose shortly after. This was the big stretch here where the FOMC news caused a lot of discussion to go right back into Bitcoin, which is kind of the relative safe haven when you're talking about non-stable coins. And you see how social dominance being high allowed prices to rise. And of course, altcoins were all going super high while Bitcoin was rising slower. But then social dominance started going below, and immediately we saw a top right afterwards, and it stayed below ever since. But really what we want to focus on now is whether it can get back to that 20% level once again. And it's at least climbed as a result of all of this FTX news, but it's still coming up a little bit short. And it's something that we may finally see a cross on as soon as this month, and that would be a very good sign that Bitcoin has some long-term bullishness to it once again. Weighted sentiment, it's hard to put too much into this right now because a lot of the reason it's looking positive is simply due to the uptick in discussion related to all assets right now. But after the FTX news dies down, if we see that weighted sentiment still is looking positive and not just due to like a social volume uptick, that would be a very good sign. Okay, so we're about 55 minutes after the hour. We touched on Bitcoin, we touched on Ethereum briefly. Why don't we go right into Cardano here and take a look at what's going on with the 8th ranked asset in crypto right now. I want to point out that we had a cool article come out from one of our users, which I thought was really, really well done. He asked, what's next? And he brought up how sharks and whales are still offloading and really have been throughout the year. And the price tends to follow these sharks and whales pretty closely. And as of now, they're staying low. So we have to be a little bit cautious about Cardano seeing this huge rebound in one of its famous, decouplings from the rest of the markets, where it just goes up 200% in 2 weeks or something like that. We would need to see a little more encouraging sign from sharks and whales to know that something like that could happen. Realized profit loss, he highlighted how there was a huge downslope in the loss and how that often leads to a bit of an uptick. We saw it sort of right here. This marked a bottom. This one was sort of interesting where it was close to a bottom way back in 2020, obviously. Black Thursday allowed prices to go down a little bit more, but eventually Cardano really saw an uptick. What we don't want to see are a lot of really high network realized profit loss spikes. And keep in mind, what he did was he divided the network realized profit loss by price, which is an increasingly popular way that some of our sentiment traders are using this metric because it adjusts for how the market cap is fluctuating. But overall, you want to avoid the really high spikes and get in on the low spikes. And right now, we're seeing a pretty low spike. So that's a good argument that Cardano might be close to a bottom at the moment. Social volume, check out how correlated the social volume is to Cardano's price. That really indicates just how much people's enthusiasm toward this asset fluctuates based on how it's performing. Unlike some other assets where it's just kind of independent and more fundamental news. But for now, social volume has continued to stay low. And he highlighted this area right now as a key to watch. If it goes below, we might see a bit of a free fall. If it stays above, Cardano might be okay. And then he also highlighted that there's a bit of a gap in volume here. And if prices stay above it, we may be okay. If it goes below, that could be free fall time as well. So I'm not a TA expert by any means, but I do think he has a good point here about people's disinterest at certain levels and then major interest when it gets down to a low level, especially here or here. So that's a little, I just wanted to highlight that because I thought it was a really well done article by one of our users. He's also a big SANR trader and does very well over on that space. For those of you who haven't heard of SANR, by the way, you can simply go to sanr.app here. And you'll see the platform's changed pretty drastically recently. You can see the amount of signals, how many people are forecasting, what the reward pool is if you end up having the best predictions. It's pretty cool, to be honest. And you basically can do mock trades without really any consequences and enjoy seeing what other people are doing. And you can shadow trade them, learn who is very successful in the space versus not so successful, and find whether some are good counter trade opportunities or shadow trade opportunities. So I definitely recommend you check out SANR. All right, so going back to Cardano here, just like most assets, we see a big uptick in volume, particularly transaction volume on chain. This was the biggest spike we saw since mid-July. Huge circulation spikes, once again, very typical for what's going on in the space right now. MVRV is very relevant though. Let's check out what's happening here. So Cardano's 30-day MVRV, not that bad, to be honest. Negative 5% isn't bad, all things considered, compared to a lot of assets. The 365-day MVRV, though, is still very negative, indicating there is some meat on the bone for a rise. And it really doesn't get much lower than like negative 60% or so. So it's very close to a bottom signal, at least on the long-term MVRV side. So keep that in mind, and it could be still a very good time to get in with low risk, according to one of Santiment's best metrics. Check out this funding rate spike, just massive. We saw huge longs. Let's zoom in a little bit. Huge longs here on the 9th, and then it's gone way short as of now. And this is what a lot of assets are doing, which is why it's off the axis on our main funding rate model. Huge shorts generally lead to short liquidations and price upticks. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but if you're a probability person like we are here at Santiment, then if you can play the odds and know that they're in your favor if you're buying or adding on to your position right now. Whale transactions, just like most assets, huge uptick due to the FTX fiasco. Let's take a look at whales here. We can look at the number of Cardano addresses first. With the price being at 35 cents, we'll probably want to look at 100,000 to 10 million. Get rid of this. Add on price, specifically versus Bitcoin. Okay. So the key whales in Cardano, they do look like they're increasing their positions a little bit. Or I should say there's more addresses, not by much, but we're at least back up to 23,100, the most since we saw that amount about 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. Now let's take a look at probably the more important one, which is the amount of Cardano held by these whales, 100,000 to 10 million. It doesn't look as good. Yeah, so the supply held is still relatively low at about 32.8%. It's at least sort of plateaued a bit ever since the beginning of the month, but it's a pretty short sample size. We're going to have to see. Long-term wise, there's still been a pretty big drop-off, just as the user-created article highlighted. Yeah, throughout 2020 all the way to now, there's less and less held by these whales. Just for kicks, we may want to look at the lower tier as well, and we'll look at them all separately. So 10,000, 100,000, and 1 million all together. Unmerge that. So yeah, the 10,000, these are kind of sharks here. The 10,000 to 100,000 sharks, I should say, are rising pretty substantially. And from mid-June until now, they've added about 4.5% more to their bags. But at the same time, the 100,000 to 1 million has been dropping by 3.3% in that same time frame. And the 1 to 10 million has really dropped off, going down another 9.4%. So yeah, not really too optimistic signs for Cardano's whales right now. They don't seem to be showing a ton of interest. Mean dollar invested age still not showing any dormant movement. Check out this massive network realized profit loss spike, just like the user made insight that he put out. Social dominance very low right now. We already saw that social volume is way down, but overall, it looks like social dominance is pretty much right around its 1-year low right now. So not a lot of discussion, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Bitcoin is really the one where we want to see it high, or prices market-wide tend to plummet. But sometimes, social dominance for an altcoin can go so low that it becomes under the radar. And that's what I think Cardano is. So when there is going to be a pop, it's going to be happening without a lot of crowd recognition of it. Weighted sentiment about neutral. And we mentioned how development activity is looking really good for Cardano lately. If we'll go to the last year, we'll even go like the last 5 years. Yeah, so I mean, this is really what you want to see in an altcoin, just continued growth over time. You could ignore the sudden drop off. That's just because, we're looking at like an incomplete week right now and it's still compiling, but it'll probably end up somewhere in this range. So overall, I mean, development activity is still just dominant for Cardano as the leading GitHub submission rate asset out there. It's just showing a ton of activity with a lot of coders and developers trying to innovate and improve the asset. So that's a very good long-term indicator for Cardano. But yeah, that's it for Cardano. Glad we could catch up on that. And I think we have time for one more if Balresh wants to give his suggestion.
Oh, that was actually the only one that we had, I think.
That's quite all right. We'll look at one ourselves. One that I think has been interesting, if we go down to some of our recent posts right before the FTX fiasco, I want to say MATIC or Litecoin. Yeah, I want to check out MATIC. This was one that we highlighted back on the 3rd, just about a week ago. And they had a huge amount of whale transactions as the price was absolutely skyrocketing compared to Bitcoin. And the top tier addresses that were holding 10 million or more MATIC, they had this huge jump here in mid-October that kind of foreshadowed there would be a rise. Because as these major addresses are holding the vast majority of the assets, whenever you see a big uptick, it usually means they're expecting price rise. And that is what happened for the following month after they did this. So let's go to the main charts here. Last 6 months. So yeah, this volume spike was happening prior to the FTX fallout that happened here. And you can see how it really propelled MATIC up to, I think, at least a year high. I don't know how long it had been, but undoubtedly the trading volume exploding was contributing to this rise, because trading volume tends to go up as people are interested in the price trend, and it tends to go down when they're not. And when it goes down, that means a reversal is happening. When it goes up, it could be a continued rise. Daily active address spikes, mostly just around the FTX scandal. Not much to say there. MVRV is an interesting one for sure. The 30-day is about even right now. You can see how it went way up to above 37% here. That absolutely was a top signal indicating it couldn't go up much further until some of the FOMOing died down. And obviously the FTX stuff is what eventually made it happen. But now it's back at about even. So prices could go either way on the short to midterm trading interval, while the long term is back in the negative once again at about negative 14.5%. So yeah, there's a slight favor toward prices continuing to go up, especially with MATIC just being in the news all the time for continued advancements and link ups with real companies out there in terms of payment methods. Like most, there's been a huge fluctuation in funding rate. If we look at just recent times, it's actually not seeing a short the way Cardano is, and it's seeing a pretty substantial long still. So that might be an argument that there could be a little bit more downside before this funding rate neutralizes and the longings die down. Whale transactions. Yeah, we saw this huge one right here. This is 100 whale transactions that were valued at $1 million or more. And that was the highest we had seen over the past year. But this is happening while the FTX stuff is happening. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. Let's take a look at how MATIC's whales are looking right now. So we talked about the 10 million or more, which is like huge addresses, but let's look more in like the shark to small, medium whale range. So with the price being at just about $1, we can safely say that the sharks and whales are going to be in this region, probably anywhere between 10,000 MATIC up to 10 million. We'll look at each one separately. The sharks are absolutely accumulating like crazy. They do seem to have some pretty decent correlation with MATIC's price versus Bitcoin. They were starting to take profit prior to the local top back in December, went all the way down, and they started accumulating right when prices were close to bottoming out. And you can see how prices really started to soar and follow what their behavior was, even all the way up to this new one-year high here. Meanwhile, the 100,000 to 1 million is dropping still, but 1 million to 10 million, as we highlighted in that Twitter post, they saw this big drop here, but then a big rise ever since, and price has followed pretty closely. So if we just merge these all together, we'll take these off. Yeah, so overall, I mean, after this sudden drop off, we're seeing a pretty big accumulation once again. I like the side of this, and if it continues to go back up above 13%, it would be a pretty good vote of confidence that MATIC's price can continue to stay up compared to Bitcoin. Not much to say on the ratio of profit to loss. There's a lot of losses accumulating right now due to the FTX stuff. And check out the mean dollar invested age. This is worth highlighting. We do see some dormant coin movement because, you know, we see this normal slant here as just an indication that dormant coins are not moving a whole lot. But you can see that it's staying below this line now, and kind of tapering off. So if we start to see it move down consistently, this could be indicative of a serious bull run going on for MATIC. Not there yet, though. It's kind of tapering. So it's teasing that the mean dollar invested age could start to be moving down, indicating there's a lot of dormant addresses that haven't touched MATIC in a while that are suddenly starting to cycle it around, which is one of the key components to any bull run. Network realized profit loss, not a lot there. Check out the exchange flow. We saw a huge drop here in mid-October, about a month ago, and then another big drop that's just happened over the past week. And yeah, it's getting close to a one-year low again in terms of the amount of MATIC on exchanges. Very good sign. We want to see that this stays very low and is constantly moving down. Social dominance, fairly under the radar, not a lot of discussion related to MATIC, as you know, it's a little bit increasingly on Bitcoin and Ethereum and of course FTT at the moment. But watch, you may see that MATIC social dominance picks up again soon on another decoupling. Also, development activity worth noting, it's been rising quite well over the past year. This is a sign of a team that's dedicated to improving the asset. So a very good long-term indication for MATIC, which currently sits at, God, it's all the way up to number 10. That's pretty crazy. So MATIC obviously being at a one-year high now, in terms of its price versus Bitcoin, I should say. That's something that not a lot of altcoins can say, but it's definitely showing that MATIC is one of the more immune assets to this long bear market compared to others, which is a good sign. So yeah, it's one that myself and the team are watching closely right now, and it's certainly an interesting asset that can change the crypto ecosphere in the long run in terms of some of the unique stuff going on in terms of its mass adoption. But yeah, that's about it, guys. I think we've covered a pretty wide array of different topics, and I hope this was helpful to you guys. We'll look at XRP next time. I appreciate the recommendation. We'll probably have some posts on XRP coming soon if you want to monitor our Twitter as well. So with that said, there's a Sam tweet as of 5 minutes ago. Let me check that before we part ways. Okay, so he says, today I filed FTX, FTX US, and Alameda for voluntary Chapter 11 proceedings in the US. Really sorry once again. This doesn't necessarily have to mean the end for companies or the ability to provide value and funds to their customers chiefly. He's optimistic that Mr. Ray and others can help provide whatever's best. I'm going to work on giving clarity on where things are in terms of user recovery ASAP. I'm piecing together all of the details, but I was shocked to see things unravel the way they did earlier this week. I'll soon write up a more complete post on the play-by-play, but want to make sure that I get it right when I do. Okay, so not really much that he's updating other than the fact that this is a voluntary Chapter 11 proceeding going on. All right, guys, once again, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate the support. Don't forget to follow us here on YouTube and on Twitter if you aren't already. Tell your friends about it. It's always very helpful for us to continue seeing growth through your support and sharing of our platform. So cheers, guys. Stay safe during this crazy time in the crypto markets, and hope you all enjoy your weekends. Talk soon.